And without no further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel. If you would like to learn anything more about today's speakers, we have included a link in the chat with their full bios. So first we have Amber Orchard, producer. Amber has over 25 years of experience producing events with recent works on shows such as Murphy's Law and Narcoleap, as well as a virtual production project for the Directors Guild of Canada that launched during BC's Creative Industry Week 2021. Next, we have Asad Manzoor, virtual production art director. Asad has worked on titles like The Mandalorian, Star Trek Discovery, and co-developed Pixelmondo's virtual production division. We also have Erin Masalam, producer. Erin has over 20 years experience in the film and television industry. She is the co-executive director of Crazy Eights, president of Chickadee Creative, and recently produced a documentary for CBC called New to Me. Also with us today, Josh Karekish, virtual production supervisor at Pixelmondo. He has a passion for emerging technology, a long background in R&D for virtual production, and most recently was a project lead of Pixelmondo's flagship LED stage in Toronto. Also, next we have Nathaniel Larouche, visual effects supervisor. Nathaniel's most recent work includes HBO's Watchmen, Marvel's WandaVision, and Netflix Shadow and Bone. He is now supervising the creation of virtual environments for Star Trek's Discovery and Strange New World series on PXO's virtual production stage in Toronto. We also have Shanaz Baksh, screen industry training lead at SIRT and the liaison of independent filmmakers of Toronto. Shanaz develops and implements over 200 film, digital, and interactive media-related workshops, courses, and community projects that impact approximately 1,000 local and international content creators annually. And I will pass it on or off to our moderator for this session, Takara Small, CBC host. Takara is a Toronto-based multimedia content creator and entrepreneur, and in 2020 was named one of the 100 most powerful women in Canada. She is the technology columnist for CBC's Metro Morning and a contributor to Canada Tonight with Janelle Massa, and the on-air technology expert for eTalk. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the amazing warm welcome. I'm so excited to be here to chat with you all. Obviously, we're doing this virtually, so at any point in time, if any of our panelists or anyone who's watching from home experience any technical glitches, please just bear with us because we want to make sure we can deliver the best panel possible. I'm going to get started. I was really excited to be chosen to moderate this panel in particular because I am such a science fiction nerd. And a lot of the shows I love actually involve virtual production. So I'm going to get started by actually asking two of our panelists to explain what virtual production is and how they prepare to tackle such, I think, is an increasingly popular way to film. So Josh, I know when we were doing kind of, the pre-roll stuff, you had a very interesting background. So I'd like you to maybe tell us what virtual production is, how do you prepare for it? And Asad, if you want to afterwards join in with your thoughts, that'd be great. So Josh, you first.
Okay. So my view on virtual production is a little bit different. For the most part, when everyone thinks virtual production, they think, well, they think the shiny new technology, they think LED screens, they think The Mandalorian. For me, it's so much more than that, though. I view virtual production as kind of a paradigm shift in filmmaking in general. I like to make comparisons to the software industry, where virtual production is like agile filmmaking. It's bringing every single department, be that pre-production or post, involved right at the beginning and have them kind of work in parallel, collaboratively, all the way through the process, and utilizing a number of tools, which I'm sure Asad can kind of elaborate on along the process. But for me, it's really, I mean, everyone's going to focus on the cool new tech, but it's so much more than that. And that's what we really want to stress to our clients. It's a new way of approaching filmmaking.
And Asad, please, can you tell us a little bit about how you?
Yeah, so I guess just to kind of add to that, kind of the crux of virtual production is the idea of game engines being used for film. Normally, if you look at the behind the scenes for something like, let's say Monsters, Inc. or any kind of DreamWorks movie, they'll tell you that to put out like or render these frames, it takes like a few hours. Now, when we introduce something like Unreal Engine or any kind of like game engine into the mix, that now happens 24 times per second. So that opens up a lot of avenues for you. Kind of one thing I like to think about a lot in virtual production is the idea of pre-production. So like something at a large scale and a small scale, if I'm like an independent filmmaker, I can grab a bunch of free software now and plan out my entire movie from my bedroom. On a larger scale, it kind of opens up the door for a lot more remote work. So pretty much you're able to kind of virtually sit inside of your film set and kind of block things out like little maquettes as though you were in the same room, but just remote.
You know, you touched on something really interesting, you know, working perhaps like in your bedroom or in your den or your office versus working on larger productions. And so maybe, you know, Amber and Aaron, you can talk to me a little bit about, you know, for individuals who are watching right now, what they need to know before they even step on set, especially because there are people who have, you know, graduated from film school, or maybe they've been self-taught and they're finding themselves in a new world that they aren't that familiar with. Let's start with Amber first, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely. I think the guys already kind of touched on that, which is the prep part is so key. And being absolutely like, by the time you're actually shooting, like the majority of the work has already happened. And I can't stress that enough with the projects that Aaron and I worked on, that you really can't put enough weight on the fact that you really need to prep, spend a lot of time prepping. You need to make sure that you know, your directors and your DPs and whatever looks or feelings they want to get from shoot day are done well in advance of you guys arriving on the day to actually shoot.
And Aaron, is there, oh, sorry, continue.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, is there, you know, a checklist of some sort, or there are certain key things that people should know?
I guess to kind of tag on to what everyone is saying, obviously fix it and prep is the huge piece, but I would also ask yourself the question is, why do you want to shoot something in virtual production? There's some pros and cons because the technology is so new still. I think everybody that has worked in Unreal knows that it takes a phenomenal amount of work to kind of get that engine to look realistic. There's also shooting plates. One of the things that we really had a big aha moment of is if, for instance, you need to have sunset and your whole entire shoot is based at sunset, it's a great opportunity for you then to shoot virtually because you don't ever have to worry about catching the sun. The sun can be exactly the same any day, any time of the day, because you've literally put the sun in your virtual volume. So those kind of things I think are really important to ask the question of like, why am I using this new technology and what's the outcome of that new technology?
Are there, just to follow up, are there some situations where it makes sense not to use or not to focus on virtual production? There are some situations where it actually makes more sense?
I would say so for sure. You know, crowd scenes, if you want to get out and see something big, you know, virtual gives you, you know, a certain level within that lens that you can work with. But if you really want to add layers upon layers upon layers and people and huge objects and car scenes, that is probably better to do. I know The Flash just shot here in Vancouver and somebody filmed it from above and you saw a huge bridge with all kinds of movement. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a lot more challenging in the volume right now, anyway, with the technology that we have.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to Google that now. Before I move on to the next question, I just want to add that if anyone watching at home has any questions at any point in time, feel free to send your questions along the chat and I'll get to it at the end. Nathaniel, so I know when we were reading your bio was being read, something that really sparked something in me was Star Trek Discovery, because again, I'm a science fiction nerd. So I'm just wondering, you know, just going off of what Aaron said, how it can be incredibly a lot of work, and I'm guessing a lot of money to make something at that level look realistic. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about the process that you've seen in your work to get to that stage.
Yeah, we've been having a lot of meetings really early on, even meetings so early on that the script hasn't even been written yet. And I actually feel like that's the best time to get in, because we're being asked a lot by the writers to like write scenes around the actual technology, instead of doing it the other way around, which is like writing a scene and then trying to like fit it into a virtual environment. So finding ways of getting the performers to actually react to the wall, or finding ways that we can get the wall to interact with the performances on set. So we try to have meetings really early on, kick around ideas with the writers, see if there's any ways that the technology can influence the actual scene. And then we'll start doing like blocking sessions where we'll have these really low resolution, rudimentary versions of the set. And we'll be able to pick lenses, find, you know, great camera angles, and try to figure out where we need to focus all of our resources, and knowing what areas in the environment that we need to make look more photoreal than others. And then over the course of just many months, usually it's over 3 to 4 months, we'll start bringing in color and textures and have meetings where we're blocking in lighting with the DP, and getting feedback from the art department. And we're just kind of moving everything that we typically do in post-production, bringing that into pre-production and working with all of the departments and working together to kind of create this photorealistic environment that helps tell the story. And there's a lot, in terms of like actually hitting photorealism, there's a lot of different workflows that we've found that depending on the environment, will approach environments differently to kind of hit that photorealistic mark. So, and even to this day, we're still experimenting with new workflows, and I don't really see that ever ending. So, like most recently, we just started working with a miniature department to see if we can scan small miniature sets and actually scale them up to be life size and then shoot them through a real camera. So there's a lot of really cool workflows, and yeah, there's just a long road that we have to travel on to hit photorealism, but it's an exciting one.
And so you kind of said a couple of things that really interested me. So you mentioned the rudimentary aspects that you, when you're filming before things actually get started. So is it that you're filming sets and incorporating that visual technology into it before the actors are even involved? Is that what you are alluding to?
Yeah, like sometimes, let's say we can, if it's a practical location, we can go scan that location, bring it into, like, make a 3D version of it, and then have a Zoom session just like we are now, but we're actually moving around this practical space and able to pick lenses, change the time of day, and be able to come up with like a really ironed out plan about how we go about shooting. In other situations where that set doesn't exist at all, we would work with the art department and they would provide us with designs or some 3D models that we can bring into our system and then start looking at it through our real lenses again and just get the discussion going in a more accurate way than storyboards could ever do.
And so, I mean, just so far, we've heard a lot of our panelists talking about the type of technology they use. There was one comment that referred to free technology in some cases. Maybe Josh and Shanaz, maybe you can tell me a little bit about training for those who are at home, who are self-taught or are thinking about, hey, this is a space I want to enter. I'm actually interested, I'm not going to do it, but I'm interested at the type of training that's available for individuals, especially Canadians. So let's start with Shanaz. Do you want to go first? Training or any suggestions of that sort? And then Josh, if you're okay, you can follow.
Sure. Just to add what the other panelists said, virtual production is another storytelling format. It's a workflow that technology and key creatives are advancing rapidly since the pandemic. So filmmakers still need to learn how to tell an engaging story, how to
Gotcha.
direct an actor, how to build realistic environments, frame and light a shot. That knowledge base is brought to virtual production, where they can then take advantage of the technology tools and creative collaborative process. I see this as a parallel learning process for new filmmakers telling their stories using a different visual technique. It is definitely a film production disruptor that is transforming traditional storytelling practices. Unreal Engine, which is at the forefront of all this, has free video tutorials, all available on their website. In April, they just released the second volume of their virtual production field guide. It's about 158 pages of very extensive, great learning material. They also have an Unreal Engine virtual production fellowship this spring and is constantly churning out educational resources and support. I would say to new filmmakers, follow everyone virtual production on social media, sign up for newsletters, attend conferences, seminars, watch behind the scenes of films like Lion King and Avatar, Mandalorian. Last but not least, I always recommend make a short film. Filmmaking is a practical medium and there's no better way to start learning by doing it.
Those are really, really great suggestions. I'm going to check those out myself. I didn't know there were so many free resources online. Josh, was there anything you'd like to add when it comes to training or learning?
Yeah, I'd absolutely love to echo the kind of project-based approach to learning. I personally find that very beneficial. And, there's a theoretical side. You can watch limitless YouTube videos, but really when you kind of apply that knowledge to your own films, that's where you really kind of cement that. In fact, I'd actually like to use this opportunity for a bit of a shameless plug. Both Asad and I are involved in a new initiative that is going public very soon, the Virtual Production Academy. And kind of the point of this is to bring the tool sets and to aspiring filmmakers and show them a hands-on practical approach to learning. So we're going to set up virtually initially, and then we're going to have campuses kind of throughout. First one in Toronto.
And so how can people find out more information about that?
Very good question. It is virtualproductionacademy.com to join the mailing list, or please feel free to connect with me directly on LinkedIn or through the Academy.
Okay, awesome, thank you. This is going to be a panel-wide question, actually, and I try to shy away from them because there's so many great voices on this panel. But let's start. I guess Amber, Aaron, are any suggestions for people who are at home and they're thinking, I want to learn as much as I possibly can? I know we kind of touched on a lot just 2 seconds ago. And I want to echo the fact that we are in the midst of COVID and lockdowns, at least in Toronto, are up and down all the time. So traditional internships may not be feasible for many people. So yes, any suggestions or advice for people watching at home?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's so much available online, to be perfectly honest. But Aaron and I were so lucky because we had the opportunity to work with the DGC BC office here. And in fact, they were very, forward thinking, and they put together an entire training initiative that took place over 2.5 days, where they trained 8 directors. We had producers observing, and everybody had the opportunity to create a micro short in the space. So they really got that practical application, which Josh was just speaking about, is so important. I think you can watch, so many videos, but that opportunity to get behind the camera and really work with the technology. And I think these guys felt like they'd all walk away with, just that opportunity to have had a couple hours. And honestly, what came out of that 2.5 days was absolutely incredible. And I think a thirst for more. So I'd say, turning to the unions and the guilds and the associations that you might be part of, finding where those training opportunities might be. And if they aren't doing them, saying to them, listen, this is like the technology that I think Canadians in particular, we need to be on top of that, and say, listen, let's get that training, and where can we do that? Who can we partner up with to make it happen?
And to tag on to what Amber is saying too, I think it's really important to get the terminology down. A lot of people talk about virtual production and volume and the, brain bar and the Unreal Engine and plates. And these are all, brand new terms to us, 6 to 8 months ago as well. And so I think it's, spending some time seeing where those phrases, those words are being used, and then kind of get a sense of like, oh, when somebody talks about a volume, it means this. How big is the volume? It means this. What is a plate shot versus an environment, in an Unreal Engine? And then that way you can just better educate yourself so that the learning curve isn't as steep, especially if you get the opportunity to get to play on a stage. You're more equipped to be able to walk in there and actually learn new things versus have that straight up learning curve.
And Asad, Nathaniel, same question, but I actually have an add-on, and that is, for new filmmakers who are hoping to showcase their skills, is there something that they should concentrate on, that they should focus on to showcase their talent? I mean, as we've mentioned, virtual production, there's quite a large scope what that encompasses. So we'll start with Asad.
Totally. Yeah. So I would start with the piece that's the most accessible, which is the previs portion of it. So I suppose one of the first presentations that Josh and I used to do regarding virtual production, kind of at the beginning of this summer, was that Josh would have kind of an iPad set up at home, and he would effectively just be diving into Unreal and kind of just filming shots. So Unreal has a bunch of camera tools, lighting tools. You could be a virtual gaffer, essentially, a virtual cinematographer. And what we would do is kind of grab these pre-made animations, pre-made environments from the Unreal marketplace, and just kind of let the scene play out and just film it as though we were on set. And kind of something that's interesting about that is if you're filming with a buddy, you could initiate what we call a multi-user session, where you would basically see Josh's head floating around in the scene, and I could just kind of see him filming from home. But yeah, I would start there.
And Nathaniel?
Yeah, I mean, Unreal Engine is free, and the library that they have is huge, and the amount of free assets that they have every single month that you can just go and download a set and then experiment with it is insane. They're giving so much out for free. And yeah, I think just getting your hands on that and starting to experiment with it will only pay off in the long run. They're so far ahead of everyone else, and I don't see any other company catching up to them anytime soon. And it's going to be the main tool set that's going to be driving this entire industry. So I'd say download that, start experimenting with it, seeing what it's capable of, seeing what it can do that is impossible to do practically, and start designing new content around that, because that's what's going to end up standing out. Instead of just planning out shots the way you would typically do, planning out shots that would be impossible to do in the real world and make your work stand out from the rest of the pack. And then for the actual talent that would be running these stages and operating them and actually creating these worlds and building the director's vision, the opportunities are going to go sky high really shortly. Right now, there's only enough talent to operate a handful of stages. There's between 6 to 10 stages, and there's going to be a bunch of those being built in a very short time, and we're going to need people who understand how to run them. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people really shortly.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So
yeah.
This is another question for you, Nathaniel and Shanaz. Let's just say there are people who are like, okay, I want to be paid to do what I love. What would you suggest someone go? Where should they go? Or is there anything they should be doing in order to get hired? I assume, just like journalism, you should have a portfolio that's publicly available. Is that what you think?
Yeah, I mean, we've been growing our own environment team over the past like 5-6 months. And it tends to, right now, the technology leans, or it's more suited towards doing sets and environments. We haven't really gotten to the place where we can do character work like in real time yet. It's close, but it's not there yet. So building, showing that you have a skill set to make virtual sets and starting to light things in a cinematic way is something that we look for in talent in terms of like people who are going to be constructing these worlds.
Awesome. I see so many questions coming in, so I'm excited. We will definitely get to those in a second. So Shanaz, what would you suggest if someone's like, okay, I want to get hired, I want to get paid to do what I love? Should they create an online portfolio that's online? Should they, during these COVID times, like what would you suggest a new filmmaker do?
Well, someone looking for work, definitely they'd have to showcase themselves and produce a portfolio. There are a lot of work. There's a lot of outreach for these new studios building LED walls. Certainly, showing your talent, showcasing your talent, and I've seen a lot of creatives doing that on LinkedIn. They're just making their shots and scenes and publishing it, and they are showcasing their talent, looking for work. And as Nathaniel said, as this grows and and studios and productions looking for key creatives, there will be more and more work. And I can speak to more training that's available right now, training that I am offering to member organizations. I can speak to that a bit later too.
Amazing. And again, keep those cues coming. We're going to get to them shortly. We're running out of time. So I'm going to turn to Amber and Aaron. I really want to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusivity in the space. That's been, a big topic in front of the camera, but maybe you could talk a little bit about how individuals who are BIPOC, LGBTQ+, how they can find work and support in this growing industry.
Yeah, sure. I do some work with the Motion Picture Industry Association out here. We recently established an equity and inclusion committee that's been working very hard to find pathways into the industry. And right now, I think it's identifying what some of those obstacles are and how we can best support those, not only, on set, but how do we get people into the workplace that want to be there with us. So I anticipate over the coming year, there's going to be I know there's a lot of work that's being done right now at many different levels. And so I'm excited to see what's going to come out in terms of making that more accessible.
And speaking, apologies, Erin.
I was going to say, with regards to barriers to entry, the volume and working in virtual production, I think everybody is super newbie at. And so creating programs like we did with the Directors Guild of Canada and even the MPA PSA that we shot on the volume as well, we tried to include as many new people as possible so that they can all sort of learn. And Vancouver, we're fortunate here. We have a fairly large industry, fairly large diverse industry. And so there was a lot of diverse faces and voices ranging from directors all the way down to cast and crew and even people, in the brain bar and tech stuff. So I think more and more training programs where everyone is sort of entering into this space at the same spot is a great time to be just naturally inclusive because we're all learning.
And, next question for both of you. Obviously in Vancouver, in Toronto, and Montreal, there's a lot of buzz and there's a lot of opportunity because that's where a lot of filming takes place. But if there is someone who is maybe perhaps, not in one of those big cities where a lot of filming takes place, what would you suggest? I assume relocating would be an option. Or
You could relocate. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the information interview. Find those people that maybe aren't in your city that you really want to connect with. pick up the phones, set up a Zoom call, just hound them for 30 minutes about questions and get to know them and establish that relationship. One of the big learning takeaways that Amber and I have both experienced is that in this new sort of paradigm of producing, it's really about relationships. Again, not that it hasn't been about relationships in the past, but because everyone's sort of new and trying to figure this out together, those relationship pieces are very important. And it also helps with costs as well, right? If you have that relationship established and people understand what you're trying to do, you might see some cost benefit.
And Amber, sorry, I think you were going to say something as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wanted to say, I mean, we know William F. White's sponsoring this panel, and honestly, they were so amazing and integral in both of the productions that we did on the stage, and super supportive of it. And I think that that is so key, is that having all these people right now that are really excited about the technology and we're really wanting to make it work and show what it's possible, yeah, so I think up here, and particularly in Vancouver, we know there's lots of murmurings with some of our bigger streamers that are looking to do some shows here. So we're excited.
Amazing. And Asad, Josh, you mentioned about the opportunities that you two are working on. I'd love to hear what advice you have for individuals who aren't in those major hubs as well, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. What would you suggest?
I guess just to start off, that's kind of one of the huge benefits of virtual production that we've been finding, is that it doesn't matter as much that if you're in those hubs or not. Something that we had to look for, at least in the past few years at Pixamondo, was that people needed to be in Toronto to get to the studio. But now, like, you could be at home taking care of the kids and just working on environments for Star Trek or Mandalorian or what have you. But yeah, I would say just I wouldn't worry about it as much anymore, which is kind of a relief. Yeah.
Josh, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add on to that. One thing that's really important to studios and productions is tax credits. So as long as you are able to relocate to a province that has applicable tax credits to that production, then you're fine. We have a lot of our team who are working on Ontario-based productions kind of scattered across the province, but they all still reside in Ontario, therefore they qualify. We do tend to struggle a little bit with hiring people on different continents just because time zone differences and the lack of tax credits. So if you are going to relocate, don't worry, you don't have to go and pay Toronto rent, but you may want to just be in a province where you're eligible.
And I just have a side question, Josh. I know there's a lot of filming that takes place in Canada, but I'm wondering, what the opportunities here are versus the US. I mean, in the past, there are a lot of individuals who will relocate to the US because there's more opportunities, more pay. What are your thoughts on that now, especially COVID times?
Oh, it's booming. I mean, there's been a lot of kind of catalyst to that. First off, we've been handling COVID quite well, which I'm proud to say. And so that's driven a lot of productions our way. Also, kind of the change in what the major streamers are looking for. Everyone's looking for episodics, and Canada is kind of the go-to place for shooting a lot of TV shows. So we already have a thriving industry that focuses on that medium, and that's where a lot of the platforms are looking right now. I can say that we're booked solid for the next 3 years. And we're rapidly looking to expand, to hire. So the problem right now is not a lack of work, it's a lack of realistic people to work on the projects.
Right. And speaking of episodic, production, Nathaniel, I'd love to know, we're kind of nearing the end of our session before we hit the Q&As. Is there anything that you've learned working on these productions, these huge ones, that you think people at home should know? Any tips or tricks or lessons you've learned before we go to Q&A?
On the production side, I think early on, because the virtual productions, I think everyone relates it to visual effects pretty easily. And VFX tends to happen at the end. Essentially all of the content for the wall, we found that we were only really reviewing it to scale in the set on the wall really close to the actual shoot dates. So I think just taking into consideration that if you plan on doing one of these projects, reviewing these environments or working in virtual production on just computer monitors doesn't do it justice. Like, you need to actually go to, if you plan on shooting on one of these walls, you need to arrange to be able to review the content very early in advance. Like, normally what we'll do is over the course of 4 months, when building one of these environments, we'll have these milestones. So the first milestone is essentially just getting the overall shape and positions and layout of everything. And then the second milestone is getting all the color and texture and everything worked out. And then all of our lighting and all the final polishing touches. So just scheduling in each one of those milestones, like months in advance, to actually review it to scale on the wall as if it was a real place. You can still do meetings, through Zoom and look at things, tiny in a window like this big, but it just doesn't do it justice to when you actually see it with your own eyes. So there is still a factor of going to a location and reviewing it. So that's something that we learned early on. And in terms of the actual artist making the content, just get in and start experimenting with it, because there's not enough enough people who understand it yet, and the more the merrier. So like, we just learned that there are some bridges between visual effects, like the workflow for visual effects and virtual production, but they are kind of their own separate thing. So there is kind of a learning curve for artists. You can't just take visual effects artists and then boom, throw them into virtual production and they get it. There's definitely a ramp up time there. So just get into it ASAP.
I think that's like the best segue to the Q&A portion. Again, there's so many great answers from our panelists, and I know this session itself will be on the Academy's YouTube page. So if you feel like you're scrambling to take notes, you can take a breather. You'll definitely be able to review it at a later point in time. Okay, so question from Jose. Is there a cost-effective entry point for indie filmmakers and producers hoping to create in this space? And would any of you recommend bringing on a UE4 virtual prod super / AD? I'm sorry, I'm just reading it as it is. I am not really down with the lingo, to scope projects early on before entering the studio environment. Okay, so that's very long question. Let's start with Asad, Josh, and Nathaniel. Oops, Josh, let it first.
Yep. Go for it.
No, after you. Sure.
Yeah, well, I would just say to start off that at Pixo, kind of the big endeavor at the beginning was to build a stage. There are a ton of smaller stages available just for rental. And I mean, like, depending on the size of the production, or like what your final delivery is, there are different qualities of stages as well. I know, like, I see some questions for LED panels specifically coming in. So there is some wiggle room there as well. So there are a lot of ways to cut costs, mostly hardware wise, but yeah.
Awesome. Josh, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I mean, there's always ways to cut costs, but with that comes compromises. And sometimes that compromise could eventually cost you a lot more money in post-production. And that's one thing that we want to make all of our clients very aware of, that this is not a silver bullet. There is, I mean, in many cases, a very prohibitive barrier to entry financially to these productions, just because the hardware alone costs quite a lot. I personally would still not yet recommend it to indie, at least indie in a dramatic format. Commercials, absolutely, I think it's great. Projects that don't necessarily require that level of quality, that level of photorealism, 100% dig into it. It'll give you, regardless, it'll give you a very unique project, which I think is always great. But it's important to be realistic, and I think to that point, finding a virtual production supervisor or consultant or AD who can help you wrangle that scope and keep it within budget is very important. We don't tell everyone. We will often tell clients whether or not we feel virtual production is the right avenue for their project, even if it means we lose out on work, just because, I mean, at this stage, we want this to succeed, and we want our clients to be happy with the end result.
Amazing. We are at 4:17, so apologies. I'm just going to move on to the next question so we can get as much as we possibly can. The next question is for the supervisors. What was the biggest unexpected drawback you found going into VP that is not an issue in traditional VFX workflows, and or the inverse, things that are simple in VP and really hard in traditional VFX? And so since this is directed at the supervisors, Josh and Nathaniel. Nathaniel, would you like to start?
Yeah, I would feel, I mean, comparing it to visual effects, there's a lot of changes that happens in post-production. Sometimes we'll do a first version of a shot, and then the director realizes that's not going to work for this sequence. Then we have to change things again and again and again. So there's like a lot of iterations, whereas in virtual production, you kind of get whatever you shoot, which, you know, I think a lot of those iterations that tend to happen in visual effects ends up being pulled ahead in all the pre-production meetings. But that is one of the drawbacks of virtual. It's kind of it's the benefit and it's the drawback. It's the benefit because like what you get in camera is the final result, right? But the drawback being that if you want to change it, that's where it becomes costly. So yeah, that's really the main drawback. The only other thing I would add is a lot of the lighting, a lot of the look of the set, the look of the environment right now, just due to the current state of like hardware and just technology in general, a lot of that isn't very malleable on the day of the shoot. So a lot of that is kind of set in stone. There's some wiggle room here and there. We can move some things around. We can pre-plan to have some lights that are movable. But just right now, due to hardware, a lot of that is we can't really change on the day. In the future, like in the next like 2 to 3 years, once you know, processing power gets to the next level, you know, those things will slowly be stripped away, and we'll be able to manipulate things freely and really have a blast. But yeah, those are the two main drawbacks.
And Josh, is there anything you'd like to add?
Not so much as add as echo. It's just that for a successful virtual production, especially at this scale, there are so many elements that just all need to work perfectly in concert with each other, and any one fault can kind of bring the show down. And that was one of the biggest challenges and the biggest learning lessons for us is, I mean, our shoot days are very tight. We can't afford any risks. Stability is the most important thing for us. So we often will make compromises, even though we know we can't do something, but it may not necessarily be worth the risk of any downtime. So that was kind of an eye opener for us. Yeah, I mean, I don't come from the visual effects side of things. I come more from the real-time side of things. So I'm looking at it from a different angle. And I mean, one thing that I've noticed and I kind of encourage is where this technology really excels is not so much in the elaborate epic shots that one would expect, but more so much in all of the shots in between. If you can remove the amount of compositing work that you have to do, cut that down by 75%, that allows the traditional visual effects side to focus on those hero shots, to focus on those epic sequences instead of spending all of their time doing roto and cleanup. And that's what's, to me, I think, really the biggest return on investment.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question. This is from Greg. How important is it to have the right screens? I've seen some low-cost screens out there. What could go wrong? I feel like this question could apply to anyone on the panel. So is there anyone in particular who would like to take this? Amber, Aaron, Nathaniel, Shanaz, anyone particular want to add about screens, or Josh?
I
Josh
can
is the
cover
screen
this
guy.
one. Yeah, I've spent many years researching this exact topic. And I would first off like to avoid any blatant endorsements for any specific manufacturer. So I'll do my best to kind of step around this question. I think the most important thing, first off, the quality of the components is incredibly important. Taking a big step back, all the LED panels are made in the same industrial city in Shenzhen. They all know each other. They all buy from similar manufacturers. It's just how they assemble them is kind of their secret sauce. And many of them potentially use cheaper components. This is not something you can cheap out on. It will drastically reduce the quality. Even the highest end panels are not without their flaws. We do have the highest end panels, and we're constantly fighting issues, technical problems. Moire, less so, but scan rate, brightness, color uniformity, heat disparity, those are all really important considerations. And one of the biggest lessons we learned is the specs of the panel don't matter so much as how it ultimately looks in camera. So if you have the time, resources, and access to panels, test them, see how they look, and see if it works for your show with your specific camera. That is our best advice.
And does higher cost necessarily equal higher quality?
It will often equal reliability. Those manufacturers who have more expensive products and are very open with that, they're expensive for a reason, because they built a name for themselves, and that often comes with reliability. You know you're going to get what you paid for. So that is why I would often encourage people to invest in more stylish panels.
Good advice. Good advice. I feel like good advice for other products in general, aside from just screens. Well, I think those are all of our questions. Oh, apologies. So this is for the art director from Aaron. What's your preferred camera for an LED wall? So Asad, I believe that is yours.
Sure. Yeah, I can briefly talk about that. We have worked with a lot of ARRI Alexa cameras, but I think more so than the camera body, and I know Josh, you could speak more to this, is the lens. So we found that the wall works really well with anamorphic lenses, just because of when you're on a long lens, and for all these in-between shots that we've been mentioning, between all the big VFX sequences, you're usually in these kind of intimate dialogue moments. And in those moments, with all the kind of niceties that you get with anamorphic lenses, kind of the anamorphic streaking, the oval shaped bokeh in the background, that tends to work really well with the wall. Now, one other thing that we've found is that it also kind of depends on the sensor. So when you look at the sensor of the camera, on modern cameras, like digital cameras, you'll have kind of a grid shaped sensor, and kind of on older cameras, like more analog, kind of like 8mm, those type of cameras, you'll have kind of a dotted pattern that's more randomized. So when you film on the set with our digital cameras, you'll often run into, or depending on how you shoot it, you can sometimes run into the issue of like seeing some unintentional lines streaking across the screen in the background. And that is a complete moot point if you take a step back and you go to like an analog camera. So a couple of options there, really depending on your production.
And then I think this is a money question. This is always popular regardless of the panel. And this is for everyone. Are there funding opportunities / programs for non-Ontario filmmakers looking to build their envelopes? And I'm just going to ask, are there opportunities for Ontario filmmakers as well? Let's just, Canadians. Or do you guys have any suggestions for funding programs or opportunities? Amber, I see that your mic is on.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say for BC and Alberta, Tell a Story Hive has an amazing program that offers funding to filmmakers in both provinces. So highly recommend them. I'd also check out Creative BC. They are a great resource for a bunch of funding programs. So, yeah.
would just add maybe digital BC, so DigiBC.
Yeah.
Some of the new technology funds that the government is kind of putting out there are some interesting options. Short film program funds as well. I haven't seen anything specifically for virtual production in terms of financing, but maybe some of the studios, including, you know, White's as well, maybe having some of those smaller internship programs. But definitely check out the ones we've mentioned.
And any other suggestions from the rest of the panelists for funding opportunities or programs?
Yeah, Epic has these Epic grants. Essentially, you can apply, and if you're using Unreal Engine, you'd be able to get funding to experiment with it.
Awesome. So there are opportunities out there. There's money out there if you know where to go. 428. Wow. Ooh, let's see. Okay, I'm going to do this question real quick. What are the costs per square foot or per panel of the screen virtual setups? What space is needed to set up a virtual set for a small studio, a startup, or a school?
I could probably cover that one. Gosh, I'd say we typically work in meters, but I'd say about 2,000 square foot for a higher end setup. That's US. So, and then yeah, 2,000 square foot US. There's a lot of additional expenses, and they certainly add up. For a small studio, you may not necessarily need that much of a footprint. For instance, the studio I'm in right now is absolutely massive. We have 40-foot ceilings, heavy steel beams, 85 feet width, and gosh, like almost 400 feet in length. Finding that kind of a real estate, though, in a metro area is going to be really, really difficult. That's one of our biggest problems. I think you'll be much better off with a smaller footprint in a downtown area. Again, price varies, but the hardware is certainly one thing that we would encourage you not to cut costs on, because you will ultimately have to pay for it somewhere.
Well, thank you, Josh. Thank you to all of the panelists for sharing their advice and everything they've experienced and learned. We are actually almost at our end time, so I'm going to throw it back to Mara or Katie if you to close out today's session.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Amber, Asad, Aaron, Josh, Nathaniel, Shanaz, and Takara for today's conversation. Very interesting. And another thank you to our partners at William F. White International for presenting this session.